This is how to mix any vocal in just 3 simple steps to take it from this
Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go.
to this.
Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
Now, every single vocal chain or preset that you've seen big artists or engineers out there using consists of these 3 simple steps to get that sound. The best part is this can be done with either stock or professional plugins. First step is the cleanup phase. Here, our goal is to get our vocal to be as clean and consistent as possible. This means using subtractive EQ to remove harsh or muddy frequencies, and maybe some light compression to tame peaks and control the overall dynamics of the performance.
Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
Now, step 2 is adding character. Here, we'll be adding some more compression to get the tone that we're after and really make that vocal front and center in the mix. We can also add some tasteful EQ and saturation to enhance the vocals at this point.
Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
And finally, step 3 is adding the swag. Here's where we add that sauce and play with dope effects like reverbs, delays, and modulation. Some of my favorite flavors to add here are some light chorus or flangers for some cool textures, or vocal doubling is also cool to add width and dimension to your vocals.
Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
Now let's break down each of these steps one plugin at a time to take this raw vocal to a fully mixed vocal. And now let's move into the first stage of cleaning things up. At this point, I'm going to solo the vocal so I can really just focus on getting a nice clean sound by just listening to the vocal, not the beat or anything else.
Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly and moves.
Okay, so a couple things to notice about this vocal. You can tell that the level that we recorded at was pretty healthy. That's why I'm getting a good amount of signal.
Driving with Shawty, she holding the lean. Living the life that I didn't mean.
Right? And I'm also not really seeing too much crazy dynamics. Dynamics meaning parts where it's very, very quiet and then parts where it's really, really loud. Maybe just right here is the only part where he starts to kind of get loud.
Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
Right? And so right there where you can tell it gets louder, I'm going to definitely want a compressor to kind of control that. And I also want to control some of these frequencies that I'm hearing poking out right now. Some of them being a more low-end kind of muddy vocal, like this low-end presence in his voice that usually comes through on a home recording or just a microphone that is maybe not as up to par with some of these others. There's generally going to be a little bit of mud or unwanted frequencies in the nasally or muddy kind of area. So let's see what we can do about cleaning some of that up in this first phase, as well as doing just a little bit of control, like I said, with the dynamics. So right off the bat, to get rid of any unwanted low end, the first phase I'll do is on the actual audio track itself. You can see I have my auto tune and I have my SSL channel. Now, for this particular vocal, I think that the auto tune is appropriate. It doesn't really sound like it's auto tuning out too heavily. That's because he wasn't really singing or adding too much melodic content.
All of the cups I've been filling with doom. Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. All of the cups I've been filling with doom.
But you can tell that he's resting right around this note, this da 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 da. It's all around this G note, right? And so it's good to have him locked into this note with this auto tune. So I'll leave that on there. And let's go ahead and move into this first EQ, which this is, again, just loaded preemptively into my template. And all it's doing is shaving off some of this low end right here, all the way up to 80 hertz. I could probably even bring this a little bit higher.
0 to 80 and belly and moves. She ain't got the problem but loving the snow. 0 to 80 and belly and moves. She ain't got the problem but loving the snow.
Right, so I'm looking to just cut out some of that unwanted low end that I said I didn't need. And I also could go down here and start messing with a little bit more of this EQ curve. But generally, I'm only going to do that if I find that this vocal is really, really bad. This vocal I don't find to be too problematic. So I'm going to move into the next phase of cleanup in the actual chain up here. So let me activate my first plugin, which is going to be VMR. Now, I don't activate this de-esser unless I find, again, that I really need it. So if the S's or the T's are very out of control on this vocal, I will initiate this first instance of de-essing right away so that I can control that before I ever even do any other EQ moves. I want to control those S's and T's right away if they're too crazy, but this one isn't too bad.
Purple and purple with green in the fumes.
Now, the first thing that I'm doing here with Virtual Mix Rack is I'm adding the virtual channel again. This is just giving me a little bit of that analog kind of console saturation that I want just driving it a little bit and so that I get some of that analog kind of feel to this digitally recorded vocal. So you can hear what this is doing.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80.
At this point, not much, but when I start to adjust this input knob and this drive knob, I get a little bit more life out of the vocal.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly and move. She purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I
Right, so that's kind of cool. It gives me a little bit of attitude from that vocal, which is nice. And I definitely want, for a rapping kind of aggressive sounding vocal, a little bit more of this drive really isn't going to hurt. I like that. But now this next step of EQ, this is not for boosting. Again, this is still in the cleanup phase, the subtractive stage. So what I'm doing is I'm going to pull back a little bit of these frequencies in that nasally kind of area and this muddy kind of area. So maybe right around here, around 300 or so. Let's see what this sounds like if I boost this area up.
purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly and move. She purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose.
So you can tell right around here, around this 280 to 300 range, this is just really like honky and low end present, kind of muddy. So I'm going to cut back on this area.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road.
Now, if I cut way too far back, it sounds way too thin. But if I just cut back a little bit, you can see that it really cleans this vocal up quite a bit.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly and move. She purple, I'm purple with green in the.
Now, the other area is the nasally area, which is usually around like 700 to maybe like 1,000. So let's see. I'm right around this 700 range. Let's boost it up.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly and move. She purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose.
It's right around this 950 range. You can see it just sounds real honky and like real like Squidward. So I want to reduce the Squidward. I want more presence, but less Squidward.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly and move. She purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80.
Right? And I might even do just a little bit of boosting on the high end just to kind of compensate some of this low end that I'm cutting. Let's just touch the high end a little bit. This isn't to add high end at this point. This is just to level out my vocal because instead of it being so low and muddy, I want it to just be a little bit more lifted and high end. So
purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly and move. She purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes.
Cool. Just like that, right? Just a tiny bit of boost on the high end, a little bit of cut right around here around Squidward range, a little bit of cut down here around this 286. And now our vocal's sounding much, much cleaner than before. I'm going to show you before and after.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly and move. She purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly.
Right? It's just a bit more crisp, a bit more in your face. It's not super, super obvious, but it's definitely getting closer to the direction that I want. So this is the first phase of cleanup. Now what I would do is I'd move into this next plugin, which is my compressor. And this is doing what I was hoping to do in this area, right? I'm looking to control these dynamics when it gets a little bit too loud. So let's play it and let's see what this compressor is doing. You can see here my ratio is set to a 1.72. So this is a very, very small ratio. With the ratio so small, this compressor is barely doing anything. I can even move this up a little bit more to like maybe like a 2.0. But since this vocal doesn't need much compression, I really don't need much out of this thing. My threshold is set to -4, and let's just see what we're doing here.
Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
So you can see here the compressor is barely doing any work at the normal point of this vocal, but as soon as it gets a little bit too loud right up here, you can see that this ducks down quite a bit.
She live in the hills, yeah.
Right? And so that's just controlling that part that gets too loud. And then what I'm doing is I'm boosting this gain up by 2. So this is my preset that I use most of the time. It's a nice moderate kind of sound. It's not too fast of an attack or too slow of an attack. It's not too fast of a release or too slow of a release. It's just a nice intermediate sound to get a nice tame vocal in the controlled realm, right? I don't want this thing to be sounding too pumping or too just aggressively compressed at this point. I'm just looking to control those peaks a little bit. So we have a bit of EQ and a bit of compression, and we already are getting a much, much closer sound to the vocal that we're looking for.
Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah. Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
Sweet. Okay, now at this point, I probably could bring the beat back in so I can start to see how is this sounding in relation to the music. So let's unmute it.
Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in. Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah. Every night she got somewhere to be.
Okay, now obviously in this big open area, I definitely am hearing like a cool delay or something that is going to fill up that gap. Hills, yeah, hills, yeah, hills, yeah, right? Something cool like that, but we will get to that point when we get to the effects. But that's just good to kind of keep an ear out for things that you know you're going to want to add to the song because I know that that area is calling for something, but we'll get to that when we get to there. For now, let's move into the next plugin, which is our C6. Now, C6 is another one that I'm using to clean up this vocal even more, right? So because he's kind of melodic and he's kind of singing and there's different nuances of his voice at different times, this is unpredictable and it's hard to just easily carve out a frequency with an EQ because maybe, there's a lot of low end at some point of the vocal, but there's another time where it sounds a little too thin. Now, whenever this is the case, it's nice to have a compressor and an EQ working together. And that is exactly what a multiband compressor is. It is a compressor that is compressing separate bands just like an EQ. But instead of cutting those bands all the time, it's reacting to how loud the signal coming in those frequency bands are. The first knob that I usually like to adjust is the low end knob right here. You can see I have this already kind of set up for you with these frequencies set up at 250, right around 1.3 kilohertz, right around 7.k, right around here at 7.6, and then these other problem frequencies right around 2.7 and right around 239. So these 6 bands here make up the problem frequencies I find most often in a vocal. So if I start bringing these thresholds down, you'll see that it starts to clean the vocal up in these unwanted areas. So the first one we're going to attack is the unwanted low end.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move.
Now you can see when I really cut that thing down, it just cuts all of my low end out. But if I don't cut any out, it just sounds kind of muddy. So there's a nice happy medium here.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose.
Now, again, it's not super obvious, but it's definitely helping that vocal not get lost in the mix by sounding too muffled or muddy. It helps to kind of clean that thing up a little bit. And I'll let you hear exactly what these frequencies are. Right, so that's super, super muffled sound that we don't want. So I'm definitely going to be cutting some of that out. Let's also cut out the next frequency up here, which is this area.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose.
Now I'm just, again, adjusting this to ear, and I'm listening for where it sounds pleasant and where it sounds balanced and just kind of even. Doesn't sound like it's too building up in any of these particular areas. So let me unmute this again.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She purple with green in the.
So now you see by just adjusting this knob here by this area, right in this 240 hertz area.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose.
It's like a more focused area of this lower end that I definitely wanted to control. So that is something that I targeted with this particular band, and you can move this around wherever you find this trouble area is.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. Purple with green in the fumes.
You can tell for him, it's right around this 250 to 280 range. So I'm going to leave it right there and just let it do its thing.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a mood.
It sounds much thinner, but obviously that is what I'm going for. I need a thinner vocal that isn't going to get drowned out in this beat. And so by cutting out a lot of that unwanted low end, a lot more of that high end presence actually starts to come out. But now, because of that, I'm going to want to control some of that high end as well. And so these two bands up here are going to help me do that. So let's check out this next band right here.
Purple with green in the when I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and
This is the kind of telephone range, right? The kind of telephony effect. Now, it can sound good, but if it's too much or there's too much buildup in certain areas, it can sound really bad too. Especially with his voice in this particular song that has some of that nasally kind of characteristic, which we already kind of tamed back with this first level of EQ here around this range. This is the same thing we're going to be looking to do right around here now. So let's see what we can do about cutting this back.
purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly a move. She purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room.
Man, that really smoothed it out quite a lot. So you can tell without it, it's definitely got that like kind of hunk and that little bit of just nasaliness to it. Now, this is stuff that comes over time if your ear becomes trained to these type of frequencies, but as soon as I hear this vocal though, I notice that that frequency range is just very dominant, especially with the style that he's rapping in. He's rapping right here and then rapping right here, and it's very front of the face type of energy. And so because of that, there's going to be a lot of nasal tones poking through, and so this is really just helping to control that.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on
Now the last band here is this high end, and a lot of times I like to boost this up actually so I can get a little bit more high end presence, because now this is sounding a little dark to me.
purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly a move.
Right, so this serves as like an EQ. You can move this up or down, and I'm thinking I want to boost it like maybe like 4 or 5 dB.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose.
But then I want to control it with this threshold knob. So I want to bring this back just a skosh so that in case that high end that I'm adding gets a little over control, I'm going to make sure that it ducks it back whenever it crosses this threshold.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly a move. She purple with green in the
Now I'm watching this line and the way that it bounces to see how much reacting I'm getting to the threshold, but I'm also listening with my ear and hearing how much high-end sibilance is poking through. And when I bring this threshold down, where is it kind of controlling it to the point where I'm hearing the high end, that glisten that I need, but it's also taming it back wherever it gets a little too much.
purple with green in the fumes. 80 and belly a move. She purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some rooms.
Right, so that's a really cool trick to give me a lot of that air and that presence without giving it too much to me, without giving too much of a good thing, because that can be overwhelming really quickly. So at this point now, I feel like my vocal is nice and controlled and cleaned up, and it's not sounding all muddy and basically raw. It sounds like it's ready for some final compression to really bring this thing to life. So let's see what we did with just this cleanup phase, a before and after.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly a move. She purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room.
Cool. So the important thing again to notice isn't necessarily what plugins I used and which order I did them in. It's more important to notice where was the before and what was the after, right? So you could tell it was just muddy and it was lacking that life and that presence that it needed. And so you can tell I didn't really do much EQ work to add a lot of that high-end presence. I just did a lot of subtractive moves to reduce a lot of that muddy stuff, so that now as I begin to add things in, none of those unwanted frequencies start to come back out. I also don't want to have my compressors down the road, which is going to be the next step we add. I don't want those reacting to a lot of that unwanted frequency range. So the low end presence can really build up on a compressor very easily. And so I want to make sure to cut a lot of that low end stuff out before I get into this compressor. So now what I can do is I can activate my main compression that I usually use for vocals, and that is going to be the CLA 76. Now, this guy here is a famous compressor used on many types of vocals and for many, many years on lead vocals particularly. This setting here on the blue setting with a nice kind of middle of the ground attack and a very, very fast release. This setting, although it seems like it's slow being on 7, that actually means fast on this compressor. This is a very aggressive sounding setting, and I just really adjust this input knob until I get a sound from the vocals that I want, and I'm usually not looking to compress this thing too heavily. I'm usually shooting right around 5 to 10 dB of gain reduction. So let's see what we're doing right here, and I'm going to adjust this input knob to kind of get the sound that I'm looking for.
Purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly a move. She purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and belly a move. She
Cool. So right around here, I'm getting much more volume out of this thing. I didn't even touch my output knob because this is usually the output that I leave it at. My template, again, is set pretty much to the point where I didn't have to touch things and I don't have to go and change things. I know that this is the levels that I usually have things at. So I leave that knob at 18 on my output and I just adjust my input knob until I'm getting about, like I said, 5 to 10 dB of gain reduction and that tone from the vocal that I like.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose.
So right about here, I'm getting that forward energy that I need from this compressor, but I noticed now that it's kind of bringing out some of those nasally frequencies again, right? It's sounding good, but it's some of those nasally frequencies are starting to poke back out. So let's see.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80.
It's right around this area, and that's where I have this extra little band right here, right? So let's see what this guy can do if I zone in on that area.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing.
It was literally right around here where I had it initially. This is that area that is just very nasally and unpleasant in this particular vocal, and so I'm going to use this now to kind of tame that back. So let's listen. It looks like it's boosted right now at 0.1 or 1.1, so I'm going to bring that back down, and let's start to bring this threshold down.
Purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She purple, I'm purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She purple, I'm
Right? Much, much more pleasant to hear just removing that little bit of frequency, but I didn't want to cut it out with an EQ. I just wanted to control it where it's getting too out of control at certain times, right? Very dynamically changing things, and I like that this curve right here is giving me that exact effect. So now we have a very cool sounding vocal. The compression is bringing this thing up and in my face. I'm definitely getting the volume out of it that I need. And right here where he goes loud, it probably is nice and controlled and keeps this thing in my face even when it's quiet or when it's loud.
Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah. Cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
So you can barely tell the difference of volume there now because this compression is doing its job to kind of even out that performance and give me a nice thick sounding vocal. All right, cool. So now we can go ahead and activate the next plugin, which after I bring in this compressor, I generally bring in this de-esser right away as well, because now that I'm bringing in all of this extra stuff with the compression, that frequency of the nasally area, which we just tamed with the C6, was sticking out, but there's also going to be a lot of sibilance and unwanted high end that's sticking through. So that's what this de-esser catches, and I find that right around 4.2 kilohertz, this 4K range is usually god-awful to the ears, and it just sounds nasty. And so by setting this threshold right around here, coming out of my compressor at 18, coming into this de-esser right around here, I know that I'm going to be getting a lot of that unwanted presence out of the vocal. So let's listen to this.
Cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah. Every night she got somewhere to be. Driving with Shawty, she holding a lean. Living the life that I didn't mean. Face, she a bitch, she in love with me. Let me go show you a different scene.
Right, so that's really controlling that high end, and it's getting rid of all of that harshness out of the vocal, which is exactly what I needed to do. Now, although I'm adding stuff in the second phase of the vocal process, I am always still being weary of, if I'm adding something, make sure to control it. So if I add something, make sure I watch that I have like a safety net to make sure that if it gets out of control, this is going to catch it. And this is what that is. This is just one of those safety nets that makes sure, hey, I'm adding a lot more frequencies now because this compressor is making things louder. So if anything builds up in this area, just duck it back down. I don't want it in the way. And now I can add a couple of extra things just to spice up and add a little bit extra ear candy to this particular vocal before even getting into the effects. So let me show you what I mean. CLA Vocals here is the next plugin I have on the chain. And this guy here on this preset I have right here is literally just ducking out a little bit of low end. It's bringing up a little bit of high end, and it adds just a little bit of compression. Now let's hear what this is doing to this vocal.
Cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got a problem, but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go.
Right, so it adds a little bit more bite and a little bit more of this kind of just grit and presence that I like. It's almost like an EQ curve because of this top end and this low end kind of cut, but overall it adds something that I really like. Now, you can also experiment with adding some of this quarter note
When I be
delay.
playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got a problem, but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go.
That would be stepping into the third element, which is adding some effects and stuff like that. But this is just to give me an idea, and it's very quickly and easily added by just adding this quarter note right here. But for now, I'm not going to include that. I'm just going to go ahead and leave this on. And let's add these other two plugins that you see here. This is just to add a little bit of extra kind of modulation and a little bit of extra ear candy. So you can see this ensemble and flanger here barely being used. This is actually a trick that I picked up from an engineer named Alex Toomey, who's a big engineer who's mixed a lot of hit records. He's actually Young Thug's like main engineer, and he actually showed me this trick where if you just kind of combine these two back to back, I learned that this is actually a really, really cool but subtle modulation that you can add to a vocal if you're just looking for a little bit of extra pizzazz. And so back to back, you can hear what they're doing.
When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got a problem, but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up.
It just pushes the vocal back into the mix just a little bit. And if you ever want, sometimes I find if I want to spice up a certain part, I might actually increase this just by boosting this mix knob up a little bit. Let's go maybe like 10 or 15.
When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got a problem, but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
Right, so for this song, maybe I want to keep it around 10 because that sounds pretty cool, adding a little bit more of this kind of like modulation, kind of ensemble-y effect here. That's just a built-in Pro Tools effect, but on that vocal, it actually sounds pretty sweet. So now what we could do is actually start moving into step number 3, which is going to be adding the swag and all the effects. So what I have over here is a few different reverbs and a few different delays that I use really often, and I don't like to overthink this stuff. A lot of time I'll just add this first reverb and see what it sounds like. If it sounds good, I move on. If it feels like it needs some work or it's not the exact reverb that I want, then I'll go through and I'll fine tune. Down here, I might actually go and like change the reverb setting, or I might just go and actually pick a different one of these reverbs that I have in my template. So if I look here, I'm gonna go ahead and just pick this reverb 1 and I'm gonna activate it and bring it up here so you can hear what this is doing.
Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got a problem, but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
So right around there, around -16 sounds pretty good. It just adds a little bit of some space. And I'm actually gonna go ahead and bring the vocal back just a little bit overall because now that I have that compression and everything kind of in, I think it's a little bit loud.
Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got a problem, but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
And again, we can come up and always check our master and make sure that we're not overpowering anything.
Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got a problem.
Obviously, you can see our music bus does appear to be clipping a little bit, but like I said, we're coming into here still at a nice level, so we're looking good there. But at this point now, our lead vocal sounds pretty good with that reverb. Maybe we want to add some delays in here too. So let's see what it sounds like to add a little bit of some maybe like quarter note delay from this particular template.
Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got a problem, but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
So this part over here, this is where I said I wanted to add that hills, yeah, hills, yeah. So that is like a half note delay. So I'm gonna add this quarter note delay kind of going on all the time. And if you listen, it's very subtle.
Light on the road, better give me some rooms.
Just barely there, right?
Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got a problem, but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hill.
But that's a really, really cool effect for just subtle space. Now, right here on this hills, yeah, let's do a cool delay throw with this half note delay. So I'm gonna say that this knob right here, I only want it to send for this word right here when he says
hills, yeah.
Right? But for the rest of the song, I don't want that delay on there. So I'm gonna just click Control and Command and click on this fader, which will bring up the automation lane here on this track. Now you can also go over here to this and go to my delay, half note, go to the level, because that's what I want to automate is the volume of this. So if I activate that, now if I move this up and down, you can see this is moving this line. It's moving this fader too. It's basically, these are tied together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say just on this line right here, let's move our grid down and select just this word right there.
Ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
Now I'm also obviously going to want to unmute this so I can hear it.
Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah. Every night she...
Sweet. Now I have a cool half note delay. And again, these delays are all preset up down here because that's what I use all the time. They're just a simple H delay with a little bit of EQ, and I don't even have the EQ on. So this is just if I want to use this EQ, I have it down there. But for now, I have this H delay set up, and there is a little bit of a filter on there, and so that gives it a cool kind of sound. But for now, that is my half note delay throw that I needed to hear right there. Maybe I'm going to turn it down just a bit more.
She live in the hills, yeah.
And you know what else? I don't really love the sound of that delay.
She live in the hills, yeah.
Because it's too mono, right? For me, I'm hearing it and I'm like, that delay is just right up the middle, and I want it to sound bigger. I want it to say hills, yeah, and then get really wide and like stereoed out. So let's go down here and actually play with this delay a little bit.
She live in the hills, yeah.
Cool. I'm gonna not actually use H delay, and I'm gonna deactivate it, and you can see I have Echo Boy on here as well. Now, I use Echo Boy Junior. If you have regular Echo Boy or whatever version you want to use, any delay would work. I'm just going to do a different sound because this has this normal setting, but it also has the wide setting, and that gives me a much wider sounding delay. And I love the different, basically the different tape and saturation that you can add to the delays. Really, really cool. So I have my saturation knob driven up a little bit, my feedback knob up, half note delay, and I have the wide setting on. So let's hear this now.
She live in the hills, yeah.
Cool, so you can hear that is a lot wider now, but now I want a little bit more of it because this is a little bit quieter of a delay. So let's turn this up just a bit more.
She live in the hills, yeah.
Cool. Another thing we can do is actually add some reverb on this delay. So this delay, this reverb number 5 is a really, really cool sounding reverb. I don't want to get too in depth because there's a lot going on here. It's just kind of like a preset reverb that I have where there's just a good amount of EQ going on. There's a lot of dips and compression, but overall, I'm going to send this stereo delay to that reverb so that when it comes back as a delay, it's actually going to sound it reverbed out. So let's send it from reverb number 5. And let's do like 100% just so I can hear it right off the bat.
She live in the hills, yeah.
Wow, you can see that sounds really cool actually with all that reverb. Let me really enhance it so you can hear exactly what it's doing.
She live in the hills, yeah.
All right, so now that delay has reverb on it, but not the main vocal too much. So that's a cool effect to make this swell up and just feel big and like it's out in the hills, right?
She live in the hills, yeah.
Maybe a little bit more. And other than that, though, I'm going to maybe duck this delay down just a tiny bit. Maybe even EQ it a little bit. Let's just maybe cut off the low end a tiny bit. And let's cut off some of the high end, too.
She live in the hills, yeah. Every night she...
All right, cool. So I like the sound of that for now. We can always come back and address that later in the ear candy phase when I really want to fine tune the effects on this thing. But for now, this lead vocal is sounding pretty sweet.
All of the cups I've been filling with doom. Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road.
There are 2 small things I want to add still. One is my widener. This is a cool effect that I like to add. You can see if I just enable it, it's already sent at 100%. What this is doing is down here, this widener is a doubler effect. So it's doubling the vocal left and right.
All of the cups I've been filling with doom.
It's then EQing that signal up around 6.8K. So it's just giving me a little bit of boost around that high end presence. And then it's spreading this whole thing out super far left and right. So let me enhance this. It's turned down to -20 right now. Let me turn this up so you can hear what it's doing.
All of the cups I've been filling with doom. Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't...
Right? So I like that to just be very subtly tucked under there. And that's why I have it at -20. But you can hear the difference it makes if I just bypass that on the lead wrap here.
All of the cups I've been filling with doom. Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got the problem but loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah.
So especially if you have headphones, you can really tell that that just takes up a little bit more space, and it's one of those cool effects that people can't put their finger on, but it just makes it sound extra special and extra magical. Cool. So now that I have that widener, I'm gonna go ahead and actually copy that over to our lead pre. So this is our pre-chorus and our chorus because I want that on all of these things. It's just a cool effect that I know I'm gonna want on all of those. So I'm gonna go ahead and put those up there. And just preemptively, I might just copy over this reverb and that as well. The reason that I'm doing that is I just want to make sure that the chorus and the verse and all that have a nice cohesive sound. And so sometimes using the same reverbs from verse to chorus can give you that effect. But I think you're going to see that when I move into the processing up here, I'm going to do something a little bit different to give those a kind of a different sound in their own. So for now, though, that was the 3 steps being applied to this vocal. You could tell we applied first some cleanup with our VMR, our compression, and our C6. We then did a little bit of actual compression in phase 2, where we're adding a character and tone back to the vocal. And we started to add some cool kind of tones that we like too with the CLA vocals, and the ensemble and the flanger add just a little bit of texture to the vocal. This isn't necessarily an effect as much as it is texture. After the texture, we want to make sure we control all of that high end, so we add the de-esser. That makes sure to control and just tame everything. But from there, we then added a little bit of reverb and a little bit of some delays and some widening effect. And now we have a pretty sweet sounding lead vocal track, especially for a rapping part. Now check it out.
All of the cups I've been filling with doom. Purple and purple with green in the fumes. When I be playing, I ain't gonna lose. Light on the road, better give me some room. 0 to 80 and barely a move. She ain't got the problem with loving the snow. Every night she gon' cut up and go. Shawty, she live in the hills, yeah. Every night she got somewhere to be.
Sweet. That's sounding pretty smooth, and I definitely am digging it. Now, I can also hear, now that that vocal is in there, I can definitely hear that there's some final leveling I want to do with the beat, maybe bring up this melody a little bit more. But these are all things that we can address here in just a little bit. For now, let's go ahead and move into the next step, which is going to be processing the pre-chorus and the chorus vocals. Now, this vocal mixing tutorial is actually a lesson from my full masterclass called Homemade Hip Hop, where I teach you everything you need to know to make professional music from your home studio. I cover what gear you need, and more importantly, what gear you don't need to get the best possible sound from your home studio. Plus all of my recording techniques, as well as my complete mixing process from taking a song from just importing some raw tracks all the way to complete mastered song. So if you want to see how I mixed the rest of these vocals, plus the full beat and mastered the whole song, then check the link in the description to check out Homemade Hip Hop and start making music that you actually love the sound of and are proud to release. I'll see you there.